but I think for all his attitude, he was curious too. He began to spray me with something. "Close your eyes and mouth. If you don't wash this off with soap and water in 24 hours, you'll die, but it sure keeps in the body heat." I stuck the book in my pocket for good luck, and Renee handed me a gun, some lunch packages, an antibiotic kit, and a water purification kit. "All right," I said, pocketing them, "but it can't be far. Uncle Izzy wouldn't have gone more than a day's journey." "Then why haven't we smelled the perfume? And why would he have gone through all this rigmarole when he must have known you'd searched that far?" I didn't know why. I pushed the door open. The bird hopped out, and I realized how easy it would be to lose him from the small round glow of my flash. He looked curiously at me, as though expecting something further. I looked curiously at him, wondering where he would lead to. Then he was off. There was no question of following him. That big, awkward bird ran so fast that in a few minutes we could no longer hear the beat of his huge claws on the rocks, even in the perfectly still, dry air. "How fast do you figure he's going?" I asked Renee. "How the hell would I know?" "Roughly." "Roughly? Maybe 50 miles an hour." "But that's incredible." "The big point-tails on the Aldebaran Kappa can do 80 with a native on their backs." "Ah," I said, "so that's it. Maybe tomorrow night." But we could hear the drumming of the returning dodo. "Don't be stupid," Renee said. "He can't carry both of us, and you'd be a fool either to go alone or stay here alone." "As a tribute to my deceased uncle, I'm going to be a fool." I stuck my flashlight into one of my many pockets and climbed onto the huge bird's back. The down beneath his outer feathers was as soft and strong as heavy fur. I dug in with my hands and feet, my head braced against the thickened part of his neck. He started off with a lurch that brought my stomach out of hiding. I kept my eyes squeezed closed. I couldn't have seen anything anyway, not even the impossible creature that was rushing through the darkness carrying me, for all I knew, straight to damnation. The night rushed past my ears into a wild keening, and it crossed my mind to wonder what Mr. Pix, my supervisor, would say if he saw me now. I had a sudden vision of Mr. Pix, even more neatly dressed than I always was, with middle-cost neck-clasp and stud discreetly shining from a plain square-edged bag shirt and dun suit. I pictured him opening a refined little box and holding it 2 feet under the customer's eyes with a gesture of faint, unconscious supplication. A comfortable, warm, happy picture in which my place, one counter behind Mr. Pix, was reassuringly assured. Then, out of nowhere, into the picture galloped a yellow-skinned monster astride a huge white bird. It turned out to be me, and I tumbled off the bird, crying, "Mr. Pix, I don't know what came over me." But I was answered only by a multitude of squawks, rustles, and scratchings. The bird was home. I could almost see vague forms. The darkness was beginning to give a little. I was warm, itchy, and uncomfortable under whatever it was that Renee had sprayed on me. Warm? Perfume trees? All I could smell were bird roosts. I stood up, finding my limbs weak, trembling and painful. First I glanced at my watch. 5 hours Terran time since we left the ship. At 50 miles per hour, we'd have gone 250 miles. If we'd gone due north, as the bird started out, we must be in the snow zone. And I was warm. I switched my flash around. All I could see were birds. There seemed to be hundreds of them. I couldn't tell which one was my bearer. "Where is the perfume?" I bawled. All I got was squawks. Some of the birds were, in fact, standing on one foot and tucking their heads away. It was growing lighter. The birds were going to bed. Feverishly, I pulled out Uncle Izzy's old volume of poetry. Brushing from my mind a vision of Mr. Pix in a state of shock, and another picture of Uncle Isidore snickering triumphantly, I stood on that desert land enchanted, on that home by horror haunted, and solemnly read The Dodo to a Colony of Wingless Birds. My Dodo identified himself at the proper place, but I kept on, waiting for something to show me my inheritance. Then methought the air grew denser, I read.
"Perfume from an unseen censor,"
a bird croaked from the back row. "Where?" I cried, pushing my way through the birds crowding around me in various stages of roost and curiosity. Then, I repeated, the air grew denser.
"Perfume,"
the bird now in front of me said,
"from an unseen censor."
He began to scratch at the ground assiduously under one of the 4 dim shapes about the level of my eyes. Then he yawned gapingly, gave up, and went to sleep. I sat down to wait, because it was almost dawn and the last Dodo had tucked his head into his feathers. Daylight showed me 4 little trees, nothing like the usual scraggly vegetation of Alvarla. They must be perfume trees, I thought, but they were too young to have blossoms or pods. I didn't go too near them, remembering what Renee had said. And remembering that, I began to figure out how they grew here. This place was a little valley. No, a crater, several feet deeper than my height, with sloping sides. The birds apparently kept it warm with their body heat, plus the heat of the rocky sides would store. Since it was a crater, the winds wouldn't reach it. The crater made a basin to catch the snow, which I could see beginning to melt at the edges and ooze down the slope. The birds provided more than ample fertilizer, and Uncle Izzy had apparently trained at least one of them to cultivate the soil under the trees. I climbed out of the crater to see that I was indeed in the regions of snow. To the north were huge drifts, and far off loomed towering glaciers. To the south the hills tapered off from white to spotted brown. That was the reason for Uncle Izzy's crazy setup. Renee and I would never have come across this crater in an ordinary search. Of course, the setup needn't have been quite so crazy. That was the personal equation of which Uncle Izzy was so fond. The trees would, I assumed, poke their heads up over the crater as they grew, reaching toward the cold, and finally getting the frostbite to fill their pods properly. At $2,000 an ounce. I had neglected to ask Renee how many pods a tree could be expected to produce, or how big the pods were, but say half an ounce in each pod and a conservative 50 pods in each tree. $100,000. I slid back into the crater, sat leaning against a somnolent Dodo, and ate a lunch package with a cupful of melted snow. All sorts of thoughts were jostling my brain. But I was bone-weary. I hadn't slept since we hit Alvarla, and the ride last night had been a tremendous strain, because I wasn't in the habit of getting any exercise at all. Therefore I fell asleep in mid-thought. It was the noon sun that woke me. I wasn't just warm, I was hot. And I was very reluctant to let go of my dream. I kept grabbing at the tag ends of it with both hands. It was the most exciting dream I'd had since the one about succeeding Mr. Pix, only very different. I'd made a fortune cultivating perfume trees. My dream was full of perfume. Some of it came from the exotic plants of my African estate. Some of it was from a long-legged, pink-haired girl, the kind African millionaires have. It was the sort of dream, I mused, unable to keep it in mood any longer, as large-minded men have. Men like Uncle Isidore. I sat up suddenly. Uncle Isidore? Large-minded? Why hadn't he had the avuncular decency to leave me his fortune the usual way? Why? Because then he wouldn't be able to play penny ante psychology and get me dreaming about wild schemes with perfume trees and African estates. That's why. Or maybe there wasn't any fortune. Suddenly I understood why people smoke. It gives them something to do when they feel helpless.